The 50th session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay will lead the chamber in prayer.
Ama namin, dalangin ko na basbasan at pagpalain mo kaming mga lingkod bayan sa pagtupad namin ng aming mga tungkulin para sa bayan. We pray that 2017 will be a better year for us here in the Senate and for our country. Continue to bless us with peace in our hearts so that we can understand, respect, and forgive one another. Bigyan mo po kami ng lakas at liwanag ng isip upang makamit ang maginhawang buhay na aming ninanais. Ganon din po, Panginoon, itinataas po namin sa inyo ang aming mga kababayan sa Visayas at Mindanao na nabaha dahil sa patuloy na pag-ulan kahapon. Dalangin po namin ang mabilis na pagbangon ng aming mga kababayang nasalanta. This we pray to you, our Lord, our guide and Savior. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Senator Binay. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Derlon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Onasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligada, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Zubiri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 20 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 49th session, Monday, January 16, 2017, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, we'd like to welcome some guests in the Senate. We have students from the Colegio de San Agustin, Binyan, Southwoods, Laguna, headed by Dr. Carmen Yupanco, the Dean, and would like to acknowledge the pastors from different congregations of Bataan and Nueva Ecija, headed by Bishop Senados, guests of Senator Pacquiao, and Mayor Tony Carolino and former Mayor Cindy Carolino of Santa Maria, Bulacan, guests of Senator Gatchalian, Mr. President.
Welcome to all of our guests and our visitors.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Bills on first reading. 1291, an act further amending Commonwealth Act number 146, otherwise known as the Public Service Act, as amended by Senators Zubiri.
Referred to the Committees on Public Services and Finance.
1292, an act creating the Philippine Sports Academy as an attached agency of the Philippine Sports Commission, providing its structure, powers, and functions thereof and for other purposes by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Sports, Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, and Finance.
1293, an act providing for the Magna Carta of Public Energy Workers, Senator Zubiri.
To the Committees on Energy, Civil Service, Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation, Ways and Means, and Finance.
1294, an act reimposing the death penalty and increasing penalties for crimes involving dangerous drugs, amending for the purpose certain provisions of Republic Act number 9165 as amended, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002, Senator Win Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes.
Resolutions. Senate Joint Resolution number 6, Joint Resolution declaring January 17 of every year as James Leonard Tagley Gordon Day, a special non-working holiday in the city of Olongapo and the Subic Bay Freeport Zone in recognition of the achievements, contributions, and heroism of James Leonard Tagley Gordon by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Local Government.
Joint Resolution number 259, resolution urging the Senate Committee on Public Information and Mass Media and other appropriate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the massive proliferation of false, erroneous, distorted, fabricated, and/or misleading news and information on social media, as well as on the so-called social media trolls, in order to come up with remedial legislation to protect the public from manipulation through the spread of false, erroneous, distorted, fabricated, and/or misleading news and information, with the end in view of coming up with a viable system to hold the authors, distributors, and/or purveyors of the same responsible and accountable under the law for the contents they generate and/or disseminate. With Senator Trillanes IV.
To the Committee on Public Information and Mass Media.
260, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the current state of the voters' database and the custody of the Commission on Elections that was hacked by the groups Anonymous Philippines and Lulsik Pilipinas, leading the National Privacy Commission to decide against the Commission on Elections for violation of the Data Privacy Act of 2012, with the end in view of instituting remedial legislative measures that will ensure that the government accomplishes its constitutional duty of preserving the sanctity and integrity of the entire electoral process, beginning with the protection of the voters' registration procedure and all data appurtenant thereto, and protecting the exercise of suffrage from all foreign and domestic threats. Senator Laila de Lima.
To the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
261, resolution expressing the sense of the Senate that the Philippine ratification of the Paris Agreement will be beneficial for the country's progress and sustainable development, and strengthen its capacity to reduce disaster risks and adapt to climate change. Senator Ligarda.
To the Committee on Rules.
Communications. Letter from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas submitting to the Senate the report on economic and financial developments in the Philippines, third quarter 2016, pursuant to Section 39A, Chapter 1, Article 5 of the new Central Bank Act.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
Letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15A of Republic Act number 7653, the new Central Bank Act, circular letter numbers CL 2016-095, 098, 099, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, dated 2, 8, 14, and 15 December 2016. Circular numbers 932, 933, 934, 935, 936, and 937, dated 16, 23, 27, and 28 December 2016. And memorandum numbers M-2016-020, 021, 022, 023, and 024, dated 8, 15, 20, 21, and 28 December 2016.
To the Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to speak on a matter of public interest, may we recognize Senator Juan Miguel Migs Zubiri.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senator Zubiri is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, today I stand, or I rise rather, on personal and collective privilege. This morning when I woke up, several friends of ours in the media had said that one of our colleagues had accused us of whitewashing a possible bribery scandal probe by delaying or taking away the jurisdiction of a particular resolution from their committee. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, I have a copy. It says here, Senator Trillanes accuses Gordon and Zubiri of whitewashing the Bureau of Immigration bribery scandal probe. Mr. President, I take offense that one of our colleagues would lay claim that we are whitewashing a particular investigation. Never in my 9 years as House of Representatives member, and many of you were my colleagues in the House of Representatives, and 4 years as a member of this August chamber, have I been accused of whitewashing, stalling, stopping any sort of investigation, Mr. President. What had transpired yesterday, Mr. President, was a discussion on the rules of the Senate. Being a former majority floor leader of this August chamber for 2.5 years, Mr. President, I clearly recall that when there are particular issues taken up about the cabinet portfolio of a particular committee, or the equivalent of the cabinet portfolio, whether it is the modernization, the expansion, the reorganization of a particular agency, it was always given to the mother committee, Mr. President. So when I saw yesterday that there was a plan to discuss the modernization of the Bureau of Immigration, or reorganization of the Bureau of Immigration, clearly recalling that it is a bureau under the Department of Justice, I stood up. But I did not accuse anyone of any plan for any wrongdoing, whatever their agenda was. Mine was merely raising the rules. As a matter of fact, I said it quite diplomatically, as I place a high value on the amity existing in the Senate as a body. And therefore, let me quote what I said yesterday, and these are direct quotes from the stenographer. Mr. President, with due respect to all members, on our proposed Senate Resolution number 256 on the possible reorganization of the Bureau of Immigration, would it not be prudent to also refer it to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights? Because the Department of Justice has jurisdiction of the Bureau of Immigration. I did not even make a formal motion, Mr. President. I just wanted to throw it to the body. I said it, I just would like to throw that question to the body, Mr. President, and would like to ask the Majority Floor Leader for his opinion. Well, Mr. President, after doing my research, I found out we have Senate Bill number 85, already under the Committee on Justice, on the Philippine Immigration Act, for the improvement, reorganization of the Immigration, Bureau of Immigration, Mr. President. We have Senate Bill number 501 of Senator Sonny Trillanes to strengthen, professionalize, modernize the Philippine immigration system, also referred to the Committee on Justice, Mr. President. And then we have of our dear honorable colleague, Senator Frank Drilon, Immigration Act of the Philippines, which proposes to reorganize the Bureau. It is already referred to the Committee on Justice. So, this strengthens my motion yesterday to refer it to the Rules Committee. Because what happens now? Who listens to the reorganization? 3 bills already referred to the Justice Committee, and then you have another one in the Civil Service Committee. I am not putting any aspersions on what their plan is. I don't care. If they want to investigate, investigate. They want to raise hell in their committee, I don't care. Mine was just to discuss rules, Mr. President. And that is why I question that. Now, what I do care about is the accusation that we are whitewashing the planned investigation of the Bureau on Investigation. Now, I take offense on that, Mr. President. And I do not know what should be done. Will it be taken up by the Ethics Committee, or the gentleman involved apologizes to this representation? But mine, Mr. President, is that I am not a defender of any faith. I am independent. As you know, Mr. President, I'm not even a member of the PDP Laban. On issues of national government, we differ on many topics. On the increase of taxes, I'm against. With the death penalty, I'm also against. With the change of the Constitution, I'm in favor of a constitutional convention, which is not what they want, as they want a constituent assembly. So, how dare people say that we are the defenders of the faith? In the last administration, I can point out several here are defenders of their faith. But have I ever raised that issue? No. And saying that we whitewashed the scandal, does it mean the 14 of those who voted to refer to the Committee on Rules for lengthy discussion is also whitewashing a possible probe on the Bureau of Immigration scandal? No. I do not believe Senator Manny Pacquiao or Senator Grace Poe or the distinguished gentleman from Cavite, Senator Lacson, will dare whitewash any investigation. They're not party to any whitewash. It's not fair, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, I don't want to take too long with this manifestation. Mine is just, Mr. President, that there's no such whitewash, there's no such plan. I never spoke to Senator Gordon about it. As a matter of fact, I was just alarmed when I saw it in the items on the agenda. I raised the issue, I brought it to the floor, we made a vote, we decided as a body. We did not even decide to bring it to the committee of just Senator Gordon. We decided to bring it to the Rules Committee, which was the proper action at this point in time when there is confusion on which committee will handle that particular topic, Mr. President. And to finish this, you know, the sad part, Mr. President, yesterday I said before any more hateful phrases or statements be made by any side, and before I make the proper motion, and then I made the proper motion to bring it to the Rules Committee, people, our colleagues, go out to the media and take it to town. I do not know if he was just misquoted, because our friends in the media have a capacity of doing so that we be fighting each other here like it's the year of the chicken, you know, in 2 weeks' time. Baka gusto nila cockfight. Hindi naman tama yun. So I hope the gentleman was misquoted. Maybe it will give him an opportunity to correct the statements that are coming out online and in the radio and TV. But just to prove to you, Mr. President, that I am not privy to any whitewash, I will make motion today, formally, as a member of the Blue Ribbon Committee, that Senator Gordon immediately hear the bribery scandal case, Mr. President. And I will actively attend. That I commit to this body, Mr. President. And for whatever outcome of the Committee of Rules, I will respect the decision of our chair, Senate Majority Floor Leader Tito Sen. But at the same time, I move that we, members of the Blue Ribbon Committee, investigate immediately, as the Blue Ribbon Committee can motu proprio take this up. I will never be a part of any whitewash. I take offense in that, Mr. President. Thank you to my distinguished colleagues.
Thank you. What's the pleasure of Senator Trillanes?
Thank you, Mr. President. In physics, as they say, if there's an action, then there is a counter reaction. And that's what happened. They blocked the referral to my committee, and therefore, they should expect me to react on the matter. And I'm glad that the gentleman took offense, because if the statement was meant to be offensive, so at least he feels something. And I would like to take offense, on the other hand, on his statement that he was never been accused of any impropriety, because, as we recall, especially the Senate President, back in 2007, he in fact resigned from the Senate because he was proven to have cheated during the 2007 elections. So he should not dare.
Mr. President?
I still have the floor, Mr. President. So if you want to declare war, then you should be prepared to have war. And this representation will not back down to people like the senator from Bukidnon. And that's it. That is my position, which I articulated in the media. I believe I have earned that right to say that. And no senator should be barred from speaking his mind in front of the media. So that's my piece, Mr. President.
You know, Mr.
So thank you
President,
for that manifestation. Yes, back to Senator Zubiri. Senator
Mr.
Zubiri is
President,
recognized.
I never cheated in that elections. People cheated on behalf of the team unity at that time, and they are now in jail. No cases were filed against us, all 12. If you take and you say that all those people in Maguindanao had cheated for 12 senators, some of them are sitting here today. Why accuse only myself on that particular issue? The gentleman also is accused of rebellion and treason. He's only lucky that the former president pardoned him. Mr. President, being the defender of the faith, he pardoned this gentleman and became a rabid defender of the faith. As a matter of fact, he attacked several of our colleagues and those who were not, who were considered opponents of the faith, with rabid accusations that have not been proven. As a matter of fact, been dismissed on the courts, left and right. As a matter of fact, he made an accusation that your party mate, the president, has 200 million in bank accounts. Where is that now? Bring that out. File the cases. Open to the public. I'm glad that he declared war. But you know, Mr. President, mabait akong tao. And people know me. I'm one of the most amiable senators of this chamber. But don't, if you pick a fight with me, I'll fight. I did not become world champion in Arnis for nothing. If you want to fight, tell me how you want to fight. Say it in front of my face. Don't say it in the media. Come out here. Say it. But to accuse me of whitewashing, hindi tama yan. I just proved to you, Mr. President. What will happen now to the Senate Bill number 501 of Senator Trillanes? It's the organization of the BI. Hindi ba forum shopping yung isa? Yung isang committee report, ay yung isang resolution? The chairman of the Committee on Justice should take offense. It's like if I take an education bill and disguise it as a trade and industry bill, wouldn't Senator Bam Aquino take offense in that? Of course he'll take offense in that. In my 9 years as legislator in the House of Representatives, and my 4 years, almost 5 years now as a senator, I have never heard of the committee of Senator Trillanes tackle investigations dealing with corruption. If it was problems with delivery of goods of particular public servants or yung non-action on benefits, yan, civil service po yan. But I've never heard an investigation case as high and as problematic or as dramatic as the issues involving Bureau of Customs, Bureau of Immigrations, the BIR, the Department of Agriculture, the topics discussed previously by Senator Lacson on the PDAF scam. Civil service was never mentioned. It was always the Blue Ribbon Committee, Mr. Chair, Mr. President. That is the proper committee, Mr. Chair. But I am not privy to any whitewash. And I take offense about him claiming, declaring war. Anong klaseng war ang sinasabi niya? I mean, you know, we are all here working as hard as we can. But one thing that I do not agree is that we falsely accuse one another for particular, to take advantage of particular sides, Mr. President. I just want to put that on record to our colleagues. Now, whatever he says, I just want him to know. There was no whitewash. There was no whitewash. And I'm not about to whitewash anything. As a matter of fact, have I attended the previous Justice Committee hearings? Have I ever stopped him from speaking, or have I ever countered any of his statements in the Justice Committee, as I'm also a member? Never. Never, Mr. President. And whenever I'm interviewed and asked about our particular colleagues' reactions on particular issues, I always tell them they have the right to say that. I never say they're grandstanding. I never say that. They have an agenda. They want to remove the president. They want to make him unpopular. I never say that, Mr. President. I have never said that. That's why we're also asking for respect amongst our colleagues, Mr. President. I think respect given is respect taken. We also have to give and take, Mr. President. So I hope the gentleman from Bicol will understand where I'm coming from. Because I am not about to, as a matter of fact, I could have moved yesterday to already refer to a particular committee. We could have had the vote if we wanted to. Ayan ang mahirap. Pero as a former majority floor leader, the proper course of action, if there is a debate on the floor, which committee handles it, it is referred to the Committee on Rules. That is the proper action, Mr. President. Now, he could have accused me of whitewash if I did that, and I referred it to a particular committee, which I think is not friendly to a particular side. I did not. As a matter of fact, I withdrew my motion, Mr. President. It was Senator, the majority floor leader, who made the motion. I withdrew it in deference to the majority floor leader. So I hope the gentleman from Bicol understands that, Mr. President.
Okay, before we continue, the chair will allow a clash of ideas with words as our ammunition, but please be reminded of Section 93. Acts and language which offend a senator or any public institution shall be deemed unparliamentary. Just a friendly reminder from the chair. What is the pleasure of Senator Trillanes?
Well, just a brief rejoinder, Mr. President.
Please go ahead. And I hope that after this, we can put an end to the issue.
I will not belabor the issue about the procedure yesterday. Just 2 points, or 3 points. First, yes, I was accused of rebellion, and I'm proud of it. I believe it's one of the shining moments in my life. So it's a badge of honor. Thank you. Now, as to the accusations, I believe the gentleman is referring to the investigations against the former Vice President Binay, which, incidentally, the Senate President was the sitting chairman of the subcommittee then. So, if there was some hint or insinuation that it was a, was this a propaganda or just an attack on the person of the Vice President, then it should also be directed to the Senate President. Now, as to the accusation that, or the claim that I accused President Duterte of having 200 million pesos in the bank during the campaign, well, let me correct the gentleman. My statement was he had 2 billion pesos in deposits in his name. So that's a correction, a big correction, and it would be presented later on. And in fact, it's one of the attached documents of the plunder case I filed against the President at the Office of the Ombudsman. So just to inform the defender of the faith. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for that information. Anyway,
I would like to strike that off the record, the defender of the faith, Mr. President, and him calling me a cheater. I so move, Mr. President. If he objects, let's put it on the vote.
Majority Leader, how do we proceed?
Well, Mr. President, we will have to second the motion of the gentleman because what transpired definitely violates Section 93 and Section 94 of the Rules of the Senate. You cannot use offensive language. And the gentleman from Bicol, who I was about to favor in my committee ruling, admitted that he really meant to offend. And the gallery laughed when he said that. I distinctly remember that. So it is an admission of guilt. So there, before that happens, I will have to second the motion of the gentleman to strike off the record these statements, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
For discussion, yes, Senator Trillanes.
Well, first, the statement that the gentleman was referring to were statements made
Outside.
outside
Right, that's correct.
the halls of the Senate.
Yeah.
And it was, if it was offensive
Yeah.
to him, well, I have accomplished my objective because it was meant to be offensive. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and tell him that I hope you did not take offense because that's the objective of that statement. Now, as to the words that would be stricken off the record, let us review first the transcript because he also used the same words directed to this representation. So fair is fair, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I did not, when I said defenders, there are defenders of the faith here. I did not accuse you. You just said now in your parting statement to the defender of the faith. I did not, yes, but I did not mention you.
Senator ZUBIRI,
Mr. President.
can I interject? Senator Trillanes, I think, wants time to go over what have been said so that he can also make his own motion to strike off some words. So,
Mr. President, may I just make a clarificatory statement? When I said earlier, sabi ko, there are those here who are also accused of being defenders of the faith. That's different from saying that he was a defender of the faith. So now, I would like to strike off what he said in his last parting statement.
yes.
And the same that he said that I was a cheater. Wala na tayong magagawa doon sa whitewash. Kasi sa whitewash, Mr. President, that's all right.
Can we give him also time so that he can also
Yes.
make a proper motion?
Before we go into a suspension that I would move for, Mr. President, let me just place on record so that our colleagues and the presiding officer can look into the interpretation of both sections.
Yeah.
When you say Section 93, acts in language which offend the senator or any public institution shall be deemed unparliamentary, you are correct when you said that offensive language was said in the media and not in the Senate. So that will not fall under this category. But Section 94 is very clear. No senator under any circumstances shall use offensive or improper language against another senator or against any public. Ano ibig sabihin ng under any circumstances? So with that, Mr. President, I move to suspend at isipin natin mabuti yung mga sinasabi natin bago tayo
Any
tira ng
objections?
tira.
Senator Trillanes is raising his hand. Yes, sir.
Just one point along the lines mentioned by the majority leader. The words used, the phrase used there were offensive words, not offensive in terms of feelings. I did not use offensive words. So there is a difference. Yes. He felt offended, but I did not use offensive words. Just to clarify, Mr. President.
Thank you for that clarification.
Anyway, as I
Is there
said,
any objection
this would be
to the motion?
Yes.
There being none, session is suspended. kausap ko tao rito sa Senators Lounge. Nag-coordinate pa daw si Giselle. Sinabi daw ni Giselle, lunch. So, ano ba yung opisina natin? Alam ba natin ginagawa natin? I-meeting mo na nga sa kanila na yan. Once and for all, malaman ko na kung ibindihan natin o hindi. Sir.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
We will request for silence as we resume. Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to strike off the record all the unpleasant exchange between the two gentlemen on the floor earlier, Senator Zubiri and Senator Trillanes. Except perhaps for the line where Senator Zubiri manifests that he has nothing to do with any whitewash.
Which was the substance of his speech. Yes. Any objection? Senator Zubiri wants to be recognized.
Yes, Mr. President. Before we consider the motion of the majority floor leader, after gentlemanly exchange of ideas with Senator Trillanes inside the Senator's Lounge, and after cooler heads prevailing, and after delicious, sumptuous merienda coming from JV Ercito, we agree that that I'm not part or privy of any whitewash. And Senator Gordon as well, as he's voicing to me, and that we agree to an investigation, and I will support the gentleman from Bicol in his investigation, and that I leave it to the Senate President and Majority Floor Leader to strike off the record all the unparliamentary remarks that were exchanged earlier in the afternoon. I agree with the manifestation or the motion of the Senate Majority Floor Leader. Thank you, Mr. President.
So there's a motion by the Majority Leader to strike off the record all the language deemed unparliamentary in the exchange between Senator Zubiri and Trillanes, and to empower the Senate President to execute the motion. Is there any objection? Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1269 under Committee Report number 15.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the practice of food technology. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of interpellation. So may we recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, Professional Regulation, Senator Antonio Trillanes.
Any objection? There being none, Senator Trillanes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. To the knowledge of this representation, no senator has reserved their right to interpolate, so I submit to the wisdom of the majority leader.
Mr. President, considering that there are no senators that made reservations to interpolate, I move to close the period of interpolations for Senate Bill 1269 under Committee Report number 15.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, considering that the measure is a substitute bill, there are no committee amendments. So I therefore move that we open the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? There being none, period for individual amendments is now open.
We recognize Senator Trillanes for his individual amendments.
Senator Trillanes is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are two minor amendments. On page 1, section 1, line 4, delete 2016 and replace it with 2017. I move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, amendment is approved.
On page 2, section 3, lines 15 to 16, delete the entire subsection D. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that the Secretariat go over the entire text of the bill and subject it to style. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection to the motion? The motion is approved.
Thank you. Mr. President, to continue with the period of individual amendments, may we recognize Senator Laila de Lima.
Senator de Lima is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I propose the following amendment. I'm sure this is just a case of oversight on the drafter. Page 5, line 7. And this refers to the issuance of subpoena. And I assume that this is a form of an administrative subpoena pertaining only to the investigative, to the particular mandate of this new body being proposed to be created, and I refer to the Professional Regulatory Board of Food Technology. So the idea here is to vest in that body the power to issue subpoena, and it is one of the examples of an administrative subpoena. I have no quarrel with that. It's just that it has to be made clear that this is a form of administrative subpoena, but while not being explicitly reflected in the bill. So my proposed amendment pertains only to the incompleteness of the usage of the word or the term subpoena duces tecum. The idea is to secure the appearance of witnesses and the production of documents in connection therewith. So if that is the case, then we need to insert the word subpoena ad testificandum and subpoena duces tecum, in addition to subpoena duces tecum, or just subpoena. So I propose line 7, and for this knowledge of the board and for this purpose, to issue subpoena ad testificandum and subpoena duces tecum.
The committee accepts the proposed amendment, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
That's all, Mr. President. Thank you.
Majority Leader?
I move that we close the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, period is so closed.
I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill 1269 under Committee Report number 15.
Any objection? There being none, Senate Bill number 1269 under Committee Report number 15 is approved on second reading.
Move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1269 under Committee Report number 15, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, the Senate Bill number 1269, consideration thereof is hereby suspended.
President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1239 under Committee Report Number 10.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure strengthening the PNP Criminal Investigation Unit. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of interpellation. So may I move to recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, Senator Panfilo Lacson, and to interpellate Senator Laila de Lima.
Senators Lacson and De Lima are hereby recognized for interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished gentleman from Cavite yield to several questions, actually several set of questions?
Willingly, to the distinguished lady from Iriga and in the Bicol region and the Republic of the Philippines.
Thank you. My first question is the sponsor, is the good sponsor clear or certain in its understanding that under the current law or laws affecting the Philippine National Police, and I am basically referring to Republic Act 6975 and Republic Act 8551. 6975 is the DILG Act of 1990, and 8551 is the Philippine National Police Reform and Reorganization Act of 1998. Is it the belief or the position of the good sponsor that under these current laws, none of the officers or units within the PNP is vested with subpoena powers? Not
Certainly.
even the chief of police.
Certainly,
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
President.
the PNP chief.
Certainly, Mr. President, and that's the reason why we're amending Section 35B sa paragraph 4 of Republic Act 6975 to reinstate the provision under RA 5750, reinstating the subpoena powers of the CIDG director and the deputy chief of the CIDG, which was mentioned in 6975 as CIU, but it has already evolved into CIDG, Mr. President.
And therefore, the proposed bill seeks to reinstate the subpoena powers of the PNP through the mentioned officers,
That is correct, Mr. President.
director and deputy director of
The
the CIDG, formerly CIU. So, the good sponsor therefore do not subscribe to any position or opinion that in fact the chief PNP has the power to issue subpoena, and that he cannot just delegate that power without an express grant from a statute.
Under the law, under 6975 and 8551, amending 6975, the chief PNP has no power to issue subpoena and subpoena duces tecum, Mr. President.
Is the good sponsor aware of Presidential Decree number 765, circa 1975, and therefore a later issuance than the Republic Act 5750, which gives to the chief and deputy chief of the CIS sub-subpoena powers?
I suppose the distinguished lady was referring to the PCINP.
Yes.
And the PCINP has been dissolved by virtue of the passage of 6975,
Yes.
where the members of the Philippine Constabulary, the defunct Philippine Constabulary, were absorbed into the new organization known as the Philippine National Police.
And therefore, is it the position of the good sponsor that even if there was such an absorption of the original organization or the original institution into the new PNP now by virtue of Republic Act 6795, or I'm sorry, 6975, the power then vested to the chief PNP under the presidential decree is not necessarily absorbed also by the PNP chief.
This representation would like to believe that it was an oversight. When the law creating the PNP was passed, I think it was an oversight on the part of the Congress at the time, and even Malacanang when it approved the bill and passed it into law, that the subpoena powers of the director CIS at the time and the deputy commander CIS and deputy commander of the CIS were enjoying subpoena powers.
And therefore, the position of the good sponsor is that it was also a case of oversight that in the enactment or in the passage of Republic Act 6975, the powers of the chief PNP under PD number 765 has also been overlooked.
Yes, Mr. President. Senator Drilon, during his interpellation before we went on December break, also manifested that the chief PNP should also be given subpoena power since he is the Director General of the PNP, and it might be awkward for some subalterns in the organization to be given the subpoena powers when the Director General does not have that power.
And I take it that the good sponsor is receptive to the proposal of Senator Drilon.
Very much so, Mr. President.
Can the good sponsor tell us what exactly are the powers of the CIDG now which necessitate the grant of subpoena powers?
The CIDG is the primary investigating unit of the Philippine National Police, but being the principal or primary investigating unit, the director of CIDG does not enjoy the subpoena powers granted earlier to the commanding officer or commanding general of the CIS. But they are mandated under the PNP law, to investigate cases brought before its attention, criminal cases for that matter, Mr. President.
And when the good sponsor says criminal cases brought to the attention of the CIDG, he is necessarily referring to the powers vested in the CIDG according to Republic Act 6975.
That is correct, Mr. President.
And necessarily, in proposing to vest subpoena powers in the CIDG, such exercise of subpoena powers, if at all that it is given to it, would be understood to be confined only to those cases falling within the investigatory jurisdiction of the CIDG.
It goes without saying, Mr. President.
So there is no need, it is the position of the good sponsor, that there would be no need to expressly say that in the proposed amendment via the subject bill.
If it is not so indicated in the law, in the amendment, then the director CIDG as well as the deputy director will not be given the subpoena powers.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why we want to amend the provision of 35B, subparagraph 4, because it's just a simple enumeration of the operating units of the PNP.
But 6975,
Yes.
may I interject? 6975 actually enumerates the cases falling within or under the investigative jurisdiction of the CIDG. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. President.
And therefore, any subpoena powers that are to be granted to the CIDG must be understood to be confined only
To the cases to be handled by the CIDG. Is that
And-
your point, Mr. President?
Yes. And does this good sponsor agree with the proposition that not all kinds of cases, criminal cases, fall under the investigative jurisdiction of the CIDG by virtue, again, of Republic Act 6975?
That is correct, Mr. President.
Because in fact, 6975 limits the investigative jurisdiction of the CIU, now the CIDG, to the monitoring, investigation, and prosecution of all crimes involving economic sabotage and other crimes of such magnitude and extent as to indicate their commission by highly placed or professional criminal syndicates and organizations, meaning syndicated crimes and economic sabotage. That is correct.
Going further, the unit shall likewise investigate all major cases involving violations of the revised penal code and operate against organized crime groups unless the President assigns the case exclusively to the National Bureau of Investigation, Mr. President.
So in which case, the CIDG can investigate any and all violations
Of
of
the
the revised penal code.
That is correct, Mr. President.
Although under the current state of law, and I'm referring to the recently passed NBI modernization law, there are questions now here about which investigative body would have primary jurisdiction, because once a particular investigative body assumes primary jurisdiction over any of the cases enumerated in the law, then the other investigative agencies would just have to do their part in a supporting role or capacity.
Yes,
That is
Mr.
correct.
President, that's clearly settled in the passage of the new law modernizing the NBI.
Mr. President, I have to dwell on these preliminary matters because what we are dealing with here is the possible grant of what I call the general type of subpoena. And when we say the general type of subpoena, it is broad in character. It is a broad subpoena distinguished from the so-called administrative subpoenas.
We are only granting the director, CIDG, and the deputy director to issue administrative subpoena, Mr. President.
And
They're not
when,
being
and
granted-
when the good sponsor mentions administrative subpoena, what exactly is that for
Well,
the enlightenment
The
of the
director
public?
has no power to cite in contempt persons who will not adhere or comply with the subpoena issued by the director CIDG, Mr. President. He will have to refer the matter to the RTC to file a petition or a motion to cite in contempt persons who violate the issuances of the director CIDG, Mr. President.
I'm glad that the good sponsor has clarified that, because that was my next question, whether that is contemplated in case of non-compliance or disobedience to the subpoena to be issued either of the chief PNP or the director or deputy director of CIDG. Is there a contemplated consequence or penalty?
It will be exactly the same power granted to several or various government agencies and instrumentalities such as the Ombudsman, the Department of Justice, the National Bureau of Investigation, the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, National Police Commission, Bureau of Internal Revenue, and the Cybercrime Operations Center of the Cybercrime Investigation Coordination Center, Mr. President.
And meaning that, as the good sponsor has stated earlier, in case of disobedience or non-compliance, there would be no direct power, direct authority of CIDG or PNP to hold the person in contempt.
Absolutely none, Mr. President.
It has to go through the judicial process.
Yes, Mr. President.
Going back to the intended grant of subpoena powers to the chief PNP himself, is it also clear to us that such grant of subpoena powers to the chief PNP or the Director General of the PNP would only be just confined again to the investigative mandate or jurisdiction of the CIDG and not of any other units under the PNP?
That is correct, Mr. President.
And therefore, at a proper time, in the course of the period of amendments, when the good sponsor would introduce, I guess it would be now a case of a committee amendment, the power, the subpoena powers to be given likewise
To the
to the
Director
Chief
General,
PNP or
yeah.
Director General.
Will be limited to cases being handled by the CIDG.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Next point. As I mentioned earlier, this is a case of a general subpoena or a broad subpoena. And I think the good sponsor would agree with me that at times subpoenas can potentially be broader than search warrants. And hence the potential for invasion of rights and also of some mischief is there, would even be greater than the power to apply for search warrants. Would the good sponsor agree with that
Yes.
proposition?
Mr. President, absolutely.
And because certainly a subpoena would have a greater reach because it would ordinarily describe just broad categories of documents or other property and is effective to reach any such items in the custody or control of the subpoenaed party, no matter where the subpoenaed items are located. Unlike in the case of search warrant, it is limited. There's the element or the requirement of specificity.
Yes.
It should be in the very premises as specifically described in the search warrant,
Otherwise, it will be an illegal
an illegal search warrant.
search warrant by virtue of its being a general warrant.
Given that premise, that in fact subpoena can even be broader, and therefore the opportunity for abuse is even higher or greater than the search warrant powers, can the good sponsor please enlighten us what specific safeguards, are there standards that are again, or that are contemplated in terms of limiting opportunities for abuse?
The safeguards can be found or may be found on, under GR number L29274. This is an old Supreme Court ruling, old jurisprudence, but I believe it's still the leading case, Mr. President. It's Pargo, Presidential Agency on Reforms and Government Operations versus Honorable Hilarion Arencio as presiding judge. The Supreme Court cited Section 71 and 580 of the revised administrative procedure. This is very old, Mr. President, 1917, but it finds its progeny in Executive Order 292, the very recent administrative code, Section 37, to be specific, Mr. President. And I would like to quote Section 37 of EO 292 in relation to Section 71 or Section 580. No, Section 71 and Section 580. Power incidental to taking of testimony. When authority to take testimony or receive evidence is conferred upon any administrative officer or any non-judicial person, committee, or body, such authority shall be, cannot read my own handwriting, Mr. President, include the power to administer oaths, summon witnesses, and require the production of documents by a subpoena duces tecum. And in the same Supreme Court ruling, Mr. President, the Supreme Court at the time mentioned or stated that they are mindful that the privilege against self-incrimination extends in administrative investigations, generally in scope similar to adversary proceedings. So there are limitations or restrictions to the grant of the subpoena powers to administrative agencies like the CIDG, Mr. President.
Would the good sponsor agree that one of such limitations actually appear in the rules of court as applicable not only to the court-issued subpoena or the judicial subpoena, but also other subpoenas issued by any officer or body authorized by law to do so in connection with the investigations conducted. And this subpoena powers intended to be given to the CIDG precisely falls under that. That this is one type of subpoena, although to be issued by another officer or body, not the court, but to be authorized by this law, by this bill, if it becomes a law, and therefore would be covered also by the limitations set forth in the rules of court, and primarily the requirement of prima facie relevance.
Yes, Mr. President.
Do we understand this correctly?
Yes, Mr. President. Also, the same ruling, Pargo versus Honorable Harencio. It stated, may I quote this part of the ruling? In sum, it may be stated that a subpoena meets the requirements for enforcement if the inquiry is one, within the authority of the agency, 2, the demand is not too indefinite, and 3, the information is reasonably relevant.
Because precisely, again, in terms of protecting rights, private rights, it is important that law enforcers would not be overzealous. Because overzealousness, as pointed out, I think in your sponsorship speech,
Yes.
is actually the source of certain evils in terms of possible abuse in the law, in the execution of the law.
That's why the delimitations are clearly defined under this bill, Mr. President.
But pardon me, pardon this representation, if that is the case, can the good sponsor please point to us specifically which part of the proposed bill can we rely on in terms of those followed? And the idea, I think, is because it is understood that it should conform to existing legal standards. But I think it would be best if in our enactments henceforth, especially this kind of piece of legislation empowering the law enforcement, the law enforcers, we should be clear about that. And that brings me to the next question. Standards like prima facie relevance, these are normally not appreciated by non-lawyers.
If only to give due regard to the sign of the times, I agree with the distinguished lady, Mr. President.
And I think that is one of the reservation that is engendered in the minds of some about the very wisdom behind the proposal of the good sponsor to grant subpoena powers to CIDG. I know that this is being limited only to the level of the chief PNP, the director, and the deputy director of the CIDG. And it's good that the good sponsor did not consider the grant of subpoena powers lower to those lower in rank, like all the way to regional directors. Unlike the NBI, the grant of subpoena powers
Delegated.
it's in the law itself.
Delegated
The
to regional
director, the
directors.
NBI director, the deputy director, all the way to the regional director. Although there is a reason for that, there is a justification for that, because regional directors and deputy directors and directors of the NBI are required to be with legal.
They're lawyers.
They are required to be lawyers. Is that the same in the PNP?
Not all regional directors, even the director of CIDG, not everybody who became or held, not everybody who held the positions of the position of director CIDG are lawyers, Mr. President.
Not even the chief
So we
PNP
should-
is required to be a lawyer.
Not even the chief
The
PNP.
director of the CIDG or the deputy director, are they required to be lawyers?
Preferably a lawyer, but not necessarily a lawyer, Mr. President.
So that makes it more imperative for us to be very clear
I
in
cannot
the
but agree.
specific standards to be followed in the grant of the subpoena powers
I agree,
to
Mr.
this
President.
set of officers.
In fact, Senator Drilon also inquired, also asked the same question, if the sponsor would be amenable to delegating or give the same powers to regional directors, and I answered in the negative, Mr. President.
Up to the regional directors?
No, I'm not for it, Mr. President.
Next question, is there a system in place for the proper storage or destruction of documents collected through this subpoena power?
The documents should be deposited to the courts, Mr. President. If and when cases are filed, then the document should be, and other pieces of evidence should be deposited. The legal custodian should be the court. But there are physical custodians assigned by the court to store whatever documents and other pieces of evidence that may be
If
needed.
and when the case reach the courts.
If and when the case reaches the courts.
But there
or
are
the
many
cases-
instances that the cases do not reach the court. And the subpoena powers here pertain to case buildup.
Then the person, the subject of the subpoena should demand the return of the pieces of evidence confiscated or submitted to the issuing authority.
Is there a specific law or regulation that explicitly provides for that?
There is
For that
none,
particular
Mr.
remedy?
There is none, Mr. President. But
And
as a
from-
matter of course, what would the director CIDG or any unit of the CIDG make use of those documents and other pieces of evidence if they are not needed for any prosecution or any litigation, Mr. President?
But the CIDG, or for that matter, any other investigative body, would not, as a matter of course, do such an initiative of returning documents secured or acquired through the issuance of subpoena, which are no longer needed for purposes of cases in court.
It's not explicitly stated, but as a matter of course, they should return those documents because those documents are useless to the issuing authority, the subpoena issuing authority, Mr. President.
And there is no need to put that
Well,
in the bill.
I'm open to even inputting that into the bill as we discussed, Mr. President.
That should be all. Thank you.
Thank you,
for the
Mr.
clear-
President.
For the clear responses from the good sponsor. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President,
Senator Gordon is raising his hand.
yes, the Minority Leader will interpolate on Monday, Mr. President, as to inform Senator Lacson. At this point, I'd like to recognize Senator Zubiri, Senator Richard Gordon.
Senator Gordon is recognized. for interpellation.
Thank you, thank you. Well, my good friend, the gentleman from Cavite, yield to what appears to be Senator Zubiri.
To the gentleman from Bukidnon. Sorry, Zambales. Olonga po, Zambales.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we needed that comic relief. We've been so tense lately. I have nothing against the proposal. I just wanted to make sure that we know where we're headed, Mr. President. So let me ask the good sponsor, what brought this about? Because in the past, as you stated earlier, as the gentleman said earlier, you had the power under the martial law regime for them to call. My concern really is the lawyers. You need lawyers. This is a form of mode of discovery.
Yes, Mr. President.
And to my mind, a crime committed must immediately be addressed. If it is not addressed immediately, then you go into the situation where you have to ask for subpoenas and subpoena duces tecum. Because kung mabagal ang investigation po, makakaalpas eh. Kaya hahabol ka na ngayon doon sa mga subpoena, modes of discovery. So, ang worry ko, I remember we had a dialogue with some of the PNP officers, and they said they needed 72,000 investigators.
Yeah, I remember that, Mr. President.
They're short, no? And ako, I will support the police because we have to discover, we have to do all these things. Pero my only concern is not abuse, but capability. Capability. I would like to make sure and get some assurance that the PNP officers are going to use this, the CIDG, in your case, and the PNP Director General.
Not just capability, but capacity, Mr. President.
Well, capacity and capability. Capacity and capability, because they can easily throw out subpoenas left and right, waste the time of the many people that they want to admit, they want to call in, and this would create some wrinkle again within the PNP image. And that is what I want to be assured of. Are we doing anything later on? I mean, I think this should be part of a whole. When we give powers to the police, we must be assured that they are provided with the wherewithal, such as lawyers who can investigate, because the NBI has this power. And even us here, in our committee hearings, we cannot just issue a subpoena without going through the Senate President. And when you give this power to the police, and they're not lawyers, then baka, I don't want to say abuse, but I want to be sure that it will be used effectively. Positive.
They have a legal division that they consult each time they issue subpoena, or if and when they're given these subpoena powers, they will have to consult with their legal division. By the way, Mr. President, according to the CIDG officer here, there are only 4 lawyers in the entire criminal investigation and detection group. But they undergo regular training, specialized training in investigation.
That must be one of the most stressful tasks in the PNP. With all the crimes being committed, you have 4 lawyers. That is really a daunting challenge indeed. That is why you will recall, Mr. President, when that information was given to us, I said that we should really support the PNP by providing more investigators who are qualified, lawyers, to really assist the police force to make it really professionalized, so that you just don't issue a subpoena just on whim or caprice. I am not afraid of abuse. I think abuse can be discovered, but what is important is you make sure that you have enough lawyers who can guide, because they need this, to do so. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is when you have this power, like I said, the best time to catch the crooks would be immediately after the crime is committed. And that is why people will resort to subpoenas when they have no leads, and that's the time that you will have to make sure that the 4 lawyers give them the right advice and the right questions.
That is correct. I agree, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, I think I hope that I can work with the gentleman from Cavite to make sure that in the budget next time, and I can see the minority floor leaders listening, and that we should be able to give the police forces enough investigators. Because we keep complaining, you cannot squeeze blood from stone. If they don't have the qualified investigators, they cannot solve cases. So we have to give them the wherewithal. Maybe we can't give them 72,000 overnight, but certainly 10,000 would certainly make a big difference. Or even 5,000 will certainly make a big difference. That is why it is my hope that we can all work together in concocting the budget requirements of the police early enough, and the CIDG and the PNP Director General should be able to tell us the lay of the land by which we can provide our policemen with the wherewithal so that they can effectively perform their functions in a legal manner.
I could not agree more, Mr. President, and it's most welcome that you will be partnering with us in helping the PNP raise its standards as far as investigations are concerned.
Well, Mr. President, I celebrated my father's 100th birthday today, and I remember even at that time when he was assassinated on February 20, coming year, it's going to be the 50th anniversary, we have not caught the masterminds. And I remember we were being tossed from one agency to the other. CIS, NBI, police, local police, and really it is very frustrating, and that's why I'm always very active in when it comes to police work. And I think if there's anything we can succeed in this Congress, is to try and really give peace and order of a higher standard, a higher caliber. And I'm glad that the distinguished gentleman, as former PNP Director General himself, will lead the charge here, and I will offer my support on that matter, and I hope the Senate will as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1239 until Monday.
Any objection? There being none, consideration of Senate Bill number 1239 is hereby suspended.
Ano? Yeah, okay. Sige.
Minute suspension.
Opo. 1278.
Yeah.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1278 under Committee Report Number 20.
Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the Trabajo Centers in Schools Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of interpellation. So may I now recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture, Senator Bam Aquino, and to interpellate Senator Joel Villanueva.
Okay, Senator Aquino is recognized as the sponsor of the measure, and Senator Villanueva to interpellate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Would the distinguished gentleman from Tarlac yield to some policy and clarificatory questions from this representation?
Definitely, Mr. President, and we look forward to the questions, comments, and suggestions of the good gentleman from Bulacan, as we know that the subject matter of this bill is also part of his wheelhouse and his expertise.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is indeed very close to my heart, and let me also put on record that we'd like to commend the Chair of the Committee on Education for prioritizing this particular measure, given the importance, especially with the timing, Mr. President, considering just recently the unemployment rate, on the youth unemployment rate was at about 14.6%, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. President, distinguished colleague, the Chair of the Committee on Education, may I be enlightened on the fact that last Congress, Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013 was passed, and in Section 9, and if I may quote, it says here, to properly guide the students in choosing the career tracks that they intend to pursue, the DepEd, in coordination with the DOLE, the TESDA, and the CHED, shall regularly conduct career advocacy activities for secondary level students. May I know from the distinguished gentleman, the Chair of the Committee on Education, about the status of the implementation of these career advocacy activities under the Enhanced Basic Education Act?
Yes. Mr. President, first for the record, the K-12 law was actually passed in the 15th Congress, not last Congress, no, just for the record. We had asked DepEd for their opinion on the matter during our hearings for this law, and they had mentioned that at this point, they are merely doing career counseling through guidance counselors, which in itself is already problematic, Mr. President, because there aren't enough guidance counselors that they can find, no? Being a guidance counselor is a specific job, and they're having a hard time also fulfilling the requirements to fill up the positions for career guidance counselors. So at this point, Mr. President, the most that they do is really tests. So they provide tests, and then usually these tests will help a student with a possible career path. But this, Mr. President, is just one of the functions that we envision for the Trabajo Center. No? We want to take it to an even deeper level, which really talks about academic industry linkage, having someone responsible in DepEd to work with the industries in the area to make sure that our senior high school students, after they graduate from grade 12, have a better chance of finding jobs. No? So it goes beyond career counseling, which is what's being implemented now in some areas in the country. It focuses on academic industry linkage, career counseling, and specifically assigning somebody to run those functions in our schools, Mr. President. No? So we could consider this deepening of that 1 or 2 lines in Section 9 of the K-12 law.
That's the main difference, distinguished colleague. And I'm glad that you made mention about the importance of having industry linkages, because it's indeed very important to note that the Department of Education would have an idea of what is happening in the industry. And perhaps it would also be better if they're going to be more specific in specific areas or specific regions, Mr. President?
Yes, in fact, Mr. President, currently, the most that DepEd receives as industry information is when they determine the tracks in the senior high school level. And even then, we know that this particular process isn't really foolproof, no? Because the tracking that we've seen on the ground doesn't always match up to the industries in the area.
Yes.
So, by having a trabaho center run by an advocate, I think the term that we use is trabaho center career advocate, we're actually making the schools more responsible for ensuring that the industries in the area, the tracking done in the senior high school system, the linkages that need to be created after they graduate, it's a continuous process. Alongside the tools that most universities use already to determine your career path and your aptitude. So it's both, Mr. President, no? Having the in-school work done, working with the industries, supporting the curriculum and the tracking, and making sure that this is a year-long process, Mr. President.
And may I know, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, if this is being done only in the senior high school, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President,
so once the student reach the senior high school, that's the only time that he or she gets assessed?
Actually, Mr. President, in the original version that we filed, it was really meant for the K-12, no? For grade 11 and grade 12. However, during the hearings, we found that a number of the SUCs also wanted to be ensured that they have these placement offices in the SUCs. To be fair, some SUCs do have placement offices, but not all of them.
And I think, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, I'm sure you would agree with this representation that it's also important that we encourage also technical vocational institutions.
In fact,
all
Mr.
over the
President,
country, because it is indeed a very important component in generating jobs.
Mr. President, that's what you call a layup question, because I am aware that during your time as TESDA Director General, you actually instituted this in our technical vocational schools, that they do have these industry linkages already. In fact, Mr. Chairman, during our hearing, the representative from TESDA said that this is already mandatory in all private technical vocational institutions and TESDA institutions to link up with the PESO, to look at the labor market information system, to match the course, the range of the courses provided, the base requirements, and to also provide entrepreneurial assistance. So it is already actually a policy in TESDA, Mr. President, and if you wish to expand that advocacy further through this act, we would be very happy to include that in the amendments.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I would be very happy to introduce some amendments at the proper time to institutionalize this particular initiative that we have started not too long ago when we were at the helm of the TESDA agency. May I just put it also in record, Mr. Chairman, the importance of having regular consultation, regular industry forums. Because I remember, Mr. Chairman, about 6 years ago, the employment rate was only about 28% of the total graduates. It went up to 70% when we started doing a regular industry consultations. And that's why, looking at the bill, Mr. Chairman, I would espouse and encourage the good chair, and I'm sure, as I talked to him a while ago, he would welcome any amendments, suggestions that will further enhance this particular measure. On another note, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, may I ask, how will the existing employment facilitation programs of the government, for example, Job Start et al., complement this proposed measure, Mr. President?
Mr. President, as you've seen in the bill, it's DepEd who is on top of this, but they are directed to coordinate with DOLE, with their labor market information system, with the Job Start program. Currently, Job Start is only found in 14 provinces, Mr. Chairman, so as that program grows, hopefully we will be able to institute this also in more areas. There are a number of agencies that look at employment. No? Even DTI actually looks at employment as well. So the idea here, Mr. Chairman, is that our Trabaho Center career advocate can work with the different agencies as they work with the different members of the private sector to implement the ideals and the goals of this bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I hope in the bill, for example, in Section 9, for the information dissemination, TESDA will also be included in this particular agencies that will promote these trabaho centers.
Definitely, Mr. President, and I apologize for, you are in Section 8, Technical Vocational Institutions, TVIs, no? Unfortunately, that's a good to note, Mr. President, that TESDA was not included in Section 9.
I was raising this issue, Mr. President, because, for example, in this particular administration, TESDA is no longer, considering it is an attached agency of the Department of Labor, it is now detached from DOLE. It's now under the Office of the President, and that's why I would gladly introduce some amendments at the proper time, again, Mr. Chairman, to include the TESDA.
Yes,
as
Mr.
an
President.
agency. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, for my last few clarificatory questions, the bill proposes to establish trabaho centers in all public schools. Mr. President, distinguished colleague, does it intend to do so only in public senior high schools where the expected employment-ready jobs seekers are enrolled, or does the bill also intend other basic education institutions? In whichever case, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I'd also like to ask, do we have a target as to how many trabaho centers do we expect to establish under this particular measure?
Again, Mr. President, the original intent was the senior high schools, no? For the
Public
trabaho
seniors.
centers.
Public.
Yes, at the public senior high schools. So it's under DepEd. I guess we could discuss, Mr. President, the inclusion of the private sector, if that is your
Or,
intention.
To somehow create a mechanism to encourage our private sector.
Maybe, Mr. President, that would be a better word, no? We can encourage the private sector, but mandate it in the public school system.
And I think it's important that if we can perhaps come up with a target as to how many trabaho centers we wanted to establish at the end of the year or in the years to come.
Sir President, let me just get the total number of senior high schools. If I ask for a 1-minute suspension.
Minutes suspension.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, there are 5,965 senior high schools. So I think as an initial target, we can include 5,965, but we leave it to the DepEd and to DBM to roll this out accordingly.
Perhaps a decent number would be half
Within the first year, Mr. President?
Within the first year?
I'm open to suggestion, Mr. President,
Okay.
but I find it little difficult to set those targets considering we don't have the, well, then again, we can always just budget for it, and that will determine the target.
I will subscribe to the wisdom of the chair of the Committee on Education. Mr. President, one of the specified tasks of Trabaho Center career advocates is to Section 5, Mr. President, letter C, is to develop testing evaluation instruments for job selection, training, and coaching. Mr. President, does this mean we will expect different testing evaluation instrument per Trabaho Center?
No, Mr. President. The idea here was to use the existing evaluation instruments. In fact, some of these are already being used.
I hope that we can use the current mechanisms that already using to ensure, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, that there would be at least minimum quality standard of these instruments.
Maybe, Mr. President, in the period of amendments, we can just delete develop and start with administer. So
Yes.
we can be sure that they're using the evaluation tools that are currently approved by DepEd.
And just to throw some ideas, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, will the distinguished sponsor agree that we can perhaps somehow establish a council, for instance, that will formulate a national standard testing evaluation instrument, allowing for a region-specific alterations given set of guidelines to be determined by that particular council?
Yes, Mr. President,
Because
we're
I think,
very
Mr.
open to that.
President, we can also tap the regional development councils, etc., and the different industry associations.
We're open to including that as our amendment, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. And for my last clarificatory question, I'm just wondering, Mr. President, how many career advocates are needed to implement the program if we're looking at 5,965 training trabaho center? And do we have a ballpark figure right now, Mr. President, as to how many are actually, or I would say readily qualified, and how many will require further career advocacy training program?
Mr. President, the idea is to have at least one per senior high school, so the answer there would be at least 5,965.
Whatever the target would be.
Yes, Mr. However, we did relax the rules on guidance counselors, Mr. President, coming from the K-12 Act, because that was a suggestion of DepEd that the requirement that they be career guidance counselors or guidance counselors has been restrictive in their hiring. So a lot of schools were left without any individual fulfilling the guidance, the career counseling function. So, Mr. President, we did relax it a little bit, but as is the usual process in DepEd, they need to be trained, no, to undertake this. But we would like to leave it to DepEd already to determine the requirements and qualifications of our potential 5,965 career advocates.
I certainly agree with the distinguished chair of the Committee on Education. Again, thank you for your patience. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Floor Leader.
Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you. For the continuation, may we now ask that the Senator Sani Angara be recognized, Mr. President.
Senator Angara is not yet here, so
We have a 1 minute suspension.
yes,
Mr.
a minute
President.
suspension. Interpellation siya.
No.
Well, lahat, because your career could also help you find the right course. But if you're in the tech program, yes. For the 60% who take the tech program.
Session is resumed. Senator Angara is recognized for interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the good sponsor, the gentleman from Tarlac, yield to a few clarificatory questions, Mr. President?
Definitely, Mr. President, and we would welcome the questions from the author of the PESO Act. And we know that Senator Angara has these advocacies very close to his heart as well.
Thank you, Mr. President. And actually, the good sponsor hit it right on the head, because I wanted to clarify the relation of the proposed measure on the floor to Republic Act 8759, which is the original PESO law, which we passed in 1999, and we amended in the last Congress with RA 10691, Mr. President. So I would like to ask the good gentleman, the good sponsor, if the measure amends or repeals the PESO law in any way.
It doesn't, Mr. President. In fact, it does refer to the PESO offices in a number of provisions, specifically that our Trabaho Center career advocates need to coordinate with the local PESO offices for their work, to also get the labor market information, either from the DOLE or the PESO offices. So definitely, Mr. President, the PESO offices are there and serve to really enhance the work of the Trabaho Center career advocates who are based in the schools.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is it my understanding, Mr. President, that each public school is going to have one Trabaho Center career advocate?
Senior high school, Mr. President.
Senior high school. So how many would that be, Mr. President, all over the country?
That's 5,965, Mr. President.
Would that mean the government would have to hire a new 5,900 new employees?
Yes, Mr. President. To be frank, it could probably work if they double up, but we've found that teachers who double up become less effective. They're already doubling up for the feeding program. They're doubling up for the PTA programs. I think it would be better if they're hired. Now, Mr. President, there are actually guidance counselors already in some schools, and there are career advocates also in some schools. They can actually be converted into our Trabaho Center career advocates because they're already fulfilling one of the functions, which is the career counseling side. We would just be adding to the functions of these individuals, which would be the academic industry linkage, as well as the placement functions. So I don't have the exact number, Mr. President. I can inquire from DepEd how many guidance counselors and career advocates are currently employed, but I think it is a far cry from 5,965, Mr. President.
Yes, certainly I would welcome that figure. I was about to ask, actually, because the measure also makes reference to Republic Act 9258 or the Guidance Counseling Act of 2004. And so I was wondering if there is already an existing mechanism in place, and if they could just be transformed, it would make the job of the government easier going forward.
Yes, we had discussed this earlier, Mr. President, that the restrictions on hiring for guidance counselors have been very difficult for DepEd to fill up those positions, Mr. President. Now, if they're already in the plantilla because of that act, but they're just unfilled because of the requirements, then actually the budget requirement will be less because there's already a budget requirement. No? But my understanding, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, is that DepEd is having a difficult time filling up the guidance counselor positions in our schools because of the qualifications necessary to fill up that position. So, in short, Mr. President, if there are already currently guidance counselors and career advocates, they will be the Trabaho Center career advocates. They're one and the same person. But if not, then we would have to hire. If it is an unfilled position, then it is already budgeted.
Mr. President, how does the sponsor, the good sponsor, envision the career advocates? Are they supposed to be as qualified as guidance counselors? Because under the law we mentioned earlier, there is a profession and they are regulated by the Professional Regulation Commission. So, in the case of a career advocate, is there any specialized training, or are they just a person who is supposed to be well-versed in careers, among other things?
Thank you for that question, Mr. President. Firstly, a guidance counselor provides more services than just career counseling. As we know, they provide services such as the mental health and the mental well-being of the students. Sometimes they work on the relationships between the parents and the children. So those functions, Mr. President, a career counselor could not possibly fulfill, because obviously you'll need to have some level of training for those functions. But specifically for the career counseling side, for the academic industry linkage, for the job placement side, these don't seem to fall under the ambit of the requirements of being a guidance counselor, Mr. President. So we're hoping that maybe with some training on the DepEd side, we'll be able to have functioning and competent career counselors.
What particular training was envisioned for these career advocates, Mr. President?
Mr. President, there are current schools who already have job placement offices who do provide academic industry linkage. PBED, no, the Philippine Business for Education Group, this has been their advocacy for maybe the past 6 or 7 years. And they do have programs which are available to support the academic industry linkage. And most likely, Mr. President, once this is implemented with DepEd, we'll be looking at these current programs already to put together that training program.
Thank you, Mr. President. In Section 6 of the proposed measure, there is mention of a Trabaho Center coordinator to be placed in each DepEd division office. May this representation be enlightened as to how many division offices there are across the country?
We're currently getting the data, Mr. President.
Okay, I'll just wait for that. I don't need it right now, but I'll expect it later on when the good sponsor has
Yes,
it,
Mr.
Mr. President. I guess, basically, I just want to know what would be the machinery entailed by this new measure, which has a very laudable purposes, Mr. President. But there is the requirement to hire, and I'm just worried that my next question perhaps would make that clearer. Is there still a teacher shortage in our schools, Mr. President?
Mr. President, on a ratio level, there are no teacher shortages, but on a per school level, you will find some schools with less teachers. Now, what do I mean? If you take the total number of teachers divided by the total number of schools, we are actually very close to the ratio, if not at the ratio that is acceptable, Mr. President. But in some specific schools, and these are more far-flung areas, you will still find schools which are lacking.
Mm-hmm.
These are harder to reach areas, Mr. President. These are areas where the teachers
Hiring bin.
don't really want to be in. So we cannot completely say that there are no shortages, but it's not for a lack of money, Mr. President. We do have the funding for it. We do have the intention for it. It's really more the implementation, no, which creates some shortages in some areas.
I understand, and that's I thank the good sponsor for enlightening me on that. I noticed the government has been on a hiring binge for teachers, I guess partly because of the transition to the K-12. Would that be correct, Mr.
Yes, Mr. President. We added 2 years. So we've had to add, of course, all the infrastructure required of adding 2 more years of instruction, which includes, of course, the soft infrastructure, which are your teachers and division, superintendents, principals, and all of these, Mr. President, apart from the physical infrastructure needed for that.
Yeah. In rolling out the trabajo centers and the career advocates in the hiring, how would you prioritize the 5,900 senior high schools all over the country, given that it may not be possible to hire all at once?
Yes, Mr. President. That's a similar question to the question raised by Senator De Lima yesterday on the Free Wi-Fi Act. No? How do you prioritize? And let me give the same answer, Mr. President. We will trust that DepEd, as the implementing agency, prioritize it on their own or through the IRR. However, if you do have suggestions on the prioritization, Mr. President, this representation would be very happy to put it there if it would mean prioritization based on need or based on poorest provinces or based on maybe even the provinces with the highest potential for employment. We would be very happy to accept those suggestions, Mr. President, to put it in the bill. However, initially, we had really just trusted the implementing agency to come up with the process for prioritization.
Thank you, good sponsor, Mr. President. I noticed that the trabajo centers will be mandatory in all public senior high schools. Why is it not made? Are they not made to apply, or is that requirement not made to apply to the private sector or the private schools?
That's a good question, Mr. President. No, to be frank, the scope of the bill, the intention was really just for our public schools. But if maybe if this is a suggestion that you wish to pursue as an amendment, we could probably look at that, Mr. President. The truth is, of course, government would have more authority and control over its own, over what it chooses to prioritize based on its budget, which is why we decided to put it as a requirement for public schools. But earlier, Mr. President, Senator Villanueva suggested that we encourage the private sector to do this, but we mandate the public schools to put up the centers.
Okay, but there would be no legal impediment to also requiring private schools? Would that impinge on their autonomy in any way? It would not impinge on
In fact, it would add to the furtherance of their goals, though, in terms of implementing the K-12. And on that note, Mr. President, my concern here, and a lot of the questions have been on infrastructure and spending. The committee really feels that this is important for the K-12 program to succeed. Because if at the end of this whole process, our graduates are still unemployed, then the whole promise of the K-12 system will be put into question. And just by graduating from grade 12 doesn't ensure you of a job. It needs extra steps. And usually that would mean the industry linkages, looking at the curriculum that's being provided, the tracking that's being provided. So, Mr. President, the bill that we are currently deliberating, the chairman and the committee feels that this is really important to the success of the whole program. If we don't put this in, we might come up with a K-12 system which still is not able to employ. And we want to make sure that the K-12 program, especially the Tech-Voc track, the 60% who won't go to college, do have a better chance of finding employment and fulfilling that promise of the K-12 reform.
Well, that's certainly a very comprehensive answer, and I do see the need with adding K-12, Mr. President. Another question, Mr. President, is why we are making it mandatory for the public high schools to have trabajo centers, but not for the public higher education institutions. And I refer to Section 8, where it says HEIs and Tech-Voc institutions are encouraged to establish trabajo centers.
Actually, this came up, Mr. President, in the hearings. And again, it was because the original scope of this bill was really senior high school. No? However, Mr. President, if the gentleman from Aurora and maybe some of our colleagues, if they feel that we need to expand this further to include our SUCs and TVIs, then we would be very willing to amend it in the law, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that openness. I just want to share some nugget of experience shared during the debates on the peso, is that school-based pesos or public employment service offices tended to be very proprietary or protective of their information. And they were wary of sharing that information with other pesos and to graduates, non-graduates or non-students of their school. So perhaps it's something that would help the good sponsor going forward, because that's why when we crafted Republic Act 10691, we made sure that all pesos would be under the ambit of the government, because the point was to share all information, and all people or job seekers would be beneficiaries of that information. So just to share that, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I have the data on the divisions now. We have about 300 divisions all over the country, Mr. President.
So then we would need 300 new Trabajo Center coordinators.
Yes.
Since, so 300 plus the 5,965 Trabajo Center career advocates, Mr. President, no? Yeah. Mr. President, I'm just a little, would there be an implicit bias in favor of seeking work for high school graduates? I think that's something we need to avoid going forward, because the name Trabajo Center, it might implicitly say that getting a job is better than going on to college. That might be the message. I think we have to be careful that that's not the message we are sending with this measure, and implicitly the career advocates also don't give that message out when they are advising the students, because they, by the name itself, Trabajo Center, it seems like the ultimate goal of high school might seem to the unschooled or or to the those who do not know better, that the end goal of his education is to find a job, merely to find a job. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. President, but so I agree, but as we know, if we look at the numbers, especially the statistics that led to the K-12 reform, we know that 60% of those graduates from high school don't really go to college, and they are at some point looking for work already. Of the 4 that go to college, we know that 3 of them will also not finish college. So it seems, Mr. President, that 9 out of every 10 will have to find a job at some point without finishing college. Now, the dropout rate is something we're working on with the Free Tuition Act. So we're hoping that more will be able to finish college, no? So maybe it will be 4 of the 4, not just 1 of the 4. But definitely, you'll find the majority, the 6, still struggling with looking for a job. And I think this is part of the K-12 reform, which was you can graduate with an extra 2 years, you will have enough wherewithal to find a job. So we wanted to manage that process, Mr. President, where majority of our high school students will not go to college. They will try to look for a job. We are empowering them with NC1 certification from test. I mean, an NC1 certification already. We might as well follow through with the process and help them find jobs in the job market, Mr. President. And as you know, it's not that easy to find a job. The tracking that was offered to you needs to be relevant to the jobs available in the area. Your equipment used needs to be at least at par or very close to the type of equipment provided also by the industries in the area. So we're hoping, Mr. President, that the function of the Trabajo Centers will help the 6 out of the 10 for those who want to get jobs, and my understanding is that most of them will want to be employed to be able to do that process. Now, the 4 that go to college, the Trabajo Center advocate, Mr. President, one of their functions is career counseling. So they can be supported through the advice and through the mechanisms in the Trabajo Center that can help them with finding the right career path for them, going into the right college or university, maybe hopefully by that time avail of the free tuition in the SUCs and find another type of employment after 4 years of being in the university system, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, good sponsor. I was just wondering, of the 6 of the 10 who have to find work and no longer have the good fortune of going on to higher education, how many of them have to do it because of force of circumstance rather than...
I think it's all probably, Mr. President, no?
So I'm just wondering, I hope we don't find ourselves in a situation where a high school graduate who has the option of going on to further education and also the option of working, is advised by a career placement officer to work and forego higher education studies. I think it's sufficient for us to flag that
Yes, Mr. President.
already this early, and perhaps not discourage our population from educating themselves if they have the opportunity.
Definitely, Mr. President, definitely. But if you look at the way and again, maybe this is something we can look at with the K-12 system, you're asked to choose your track at grade 10, no? So which means, more or less, as early as grade 10, we're already asking our students and their families to make a determination whether they'll take the academic track or the tech-voc track. And very well noted, Mr. President, no? But that decision actually happens much earlier. And that's something I think what you had raised is something we need to look at also, that maybe in determining what track, and maybe in 2 years' time, you're in a better situation and you can afford college already, that they're not deterred, no, from going into higher education.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just to put that out there and as a caveat, no, I would like to inquire about the NCAE, or the National Career Assessment Examination. Is it my understanding that this measure seeks to institutionalize it?
Yes, Mr. President.
At present, it is not institutionalized.
It's not, Mr. President.
So how many years has this examination been given?
Can I get a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President?
A minute suspension.
So that's not implemented by everyone. May years daw. Okay. Wala. Pero may 1 year na hindi sila ginawa. For example, to make natural track. It's not mandatory in that sense. How long has it been run? As a hearing today for the exam.
You don't have it right now?
Give it later, no? 1 year. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, regarding the examination, currently it is implemented. However, there are times when DepEd decides not to do it. So, how do I say it? It is intermittent, Mr. President. That's a good way to put it. There are times when may calamities and they decide not to run it in a particular school. So it doesn't really have the mandatory nature where come hell or high water, it will be implemented. And we wish to implement that, Mr. President, on a more regular basis. We will provide to the good gentleman what year this particular version of the test has been implemented. We're just trying to be specific with the answer, Mr. President. Our apologies on that.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and I trust that the good sponsor will furnish it as he promised, and it's not an urgent piece of information that we would need right now. Just I would appreciate it going forward, Mr. President. What the purpose of the examination is and why we are instituting it, because obviously the state would incur expenses in running these types of examinations, but if the purpose is really to guide our youth and provide them with more options going forward, then by all means, I think that expense would be money well spent, Mr.
Actually,
President.
Mr. President, if I may, during the hearings, one of the comments of the resource speakers was that we need a better test. Some of the comments of some of our resource persons during the hearing was that the results of the test are a little broad, and maybe we could look at improving this or evolving this further, Mr. President.
Perhaps during the period of amendments, we could discuss it further.
Yes, Mr. President,
Mr. President.
definitely.
But for now, I'm quite satisfied, and I thank the gentleman from Tarlac, good sponsor, for his patience in answering our questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and we look forward to your amendments and your suggestions.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Meron ka rito sa Monday, ano? The interpellations of the Minority Leader will be on Monday, Mr. President. So I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1278 under Committee Report Number 20.
Any objection? There being none, consideration of the measure is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, January 18, 2017.
Any objection? There being none, session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, January 18, 2017.